Very lucky today to have with us Jim Benson. Jim has a different story to share with us. He came to Panama and had his own home built here as opposed to buying one or renting one. So without further ado, Jim, can you give us a little background on how you came to Panama, why you made the decision to build?
Yeah, I had done some work in Central America back in the mid to late 90s, really like Central America. You know, just the proximity to the U.S., the convenience, but had looked around for quite a while for a country that I might be able to put my money into and then perhaps get it back out someday. And a friend of mine took a vacation to Panama and came back and said, I think I've found the place you're looking for. And you know, the fact that my family's in Florida, and the fact that it's a 3.5 hour flight, if I need to get back there quickly, was just kind of the clincher.
What's your background in construction? You've done this before you arrived in Panama.
Yeah, my younger days, I used to frame houses. I was a frame carpenter and also a building superintendent. So there was a time when I knew my way around a job site. And
you've done construction overseas for various projects and so forth, so you're not unfamiliar with working outside the United States?
No, not at all. But building in Panama was still a new adventure.
Okay, well, tell us a little bit more about it. What were some of the expectations that didn't work out, and whatever you have to share, let's just hear it all.
Well, my warning to anyone would be, don't come into Panama with a set of plans and expect the building standards that you're probably used to in wherever you're from. The system in Panama, you know, whereas I'm from the U.S., there's building inspectors at every phase of the project. Here, the contractor is his own building inspector. So that's, you know, you might think that's sort of like the fox guarding the hen house. And I do think that's often the way it happens. I guess my experience is the builders here are good at the superstructure of the house, the foundations, the important structural aspects, which I guess if you have to make a choice, that's what you want. But when you start getting close to the end of the money, the finished work is where there's a big drop off.
For example?
Any finished work. And that's if you make it that far. I think from my experience and also what I've heard from other people's experiences are often the money runs out before it's anticipated. So, you know, less money, less or lower expectations, perhaps.
A lot of people do come down and intend to build homes. I know that I've seen them, met with them, talked to them. They have their plans already for exactly what they want to build, and they think they can go right to work and do it. Actually, it doesn't work that way here. Can you tell us how it does work?
Yeah, your plans actually have to be signed off on by a Panamanian architect. So you can come down with the best set of plans in the world, but you know, you still need that added aspect. And from what I've heard, most Panamanian architects, you know, have their own artistic styles, so they like getting their own style added into the project. The other thing that you have to be very careful of in bringing in plants from outside is just the materials, what's available here. I think in the last few years, I think there's probably a much greater choice, greater variety of what's available here. But when I was building my house 7 or 8 years ago, there were a lot of limitations. The other thing I would caution is people come here thinking they're going to build their dream house, and all sorts of fancy little flares, and from what I've seen, the funkier you try to get with anything, it's just the greater the probability is that you're going to run into problems. It's going to fall short of expectations. If it doesn't fall short of expectations, it's it's probably going to be the first place you get a leak. So it's it's nice to temper your dreams with some realism.
That's a good point. Well, now you're higher up in the Highlands of Panama where you built. Did that add a special complication? I mean, you had work crews, you had material and supplies, and here you are up in the mountains.
Yeah, it complicated everything. From the just from the construction aspects, just trying to get a crew up the mountain every day. And I think it's really hard to keep a crew as well, because when building's going on the way it is now, that's going up and down a mountain is an hour out of workers' days that they're not getting paid for. And it's hard enough to get guys out on the job site every day. Also, in terms of materials, you've got to add a distance into everything. Trying to get rebar block up to a site, it takes longer. There never seems to be any shortage of excuses why things don't get done today, and you need to be prepared that you're building in excuses for people. The other complicating factors of building up in the mountains are there's heavier rainfall, so you're losing more building time. And once you're in the house, the humidity factor. Where I live, I've never seen humidity do some of the things it's done since I've been in the house.
Like?
Well, I've had quite a few personal items grow fur. Things that you never thought would mold. Things like rubber. Nothing is safe. So I don't think we were designing the house. We took that into consideration as much as we should have. And it's taken a few years to, I think, figure out how to adequately compensate.
You built a pretty good-sized house. It's a large house by most standards of most folks here. If you had to do it over again, would you have gone as large, or what would you have done differently if you had to do it over again, if anything? I know you love your house too.
I do. Yeah, it's definitely more space than I need. That would probably be the first thing, is pretty much cut it in half. It's like 4,300 square feet of living space, and there's people that might think that's a little excessive for a single guy, it's actually gotten to the point where, when Panamanians are around and ask me if my family's in there, I'm embarrassed to tell them I live there alone.
That's about 400 square meters for our folks in Europe. It's a pretty good size. Well, when it's all said and done and finished, though, you happy that you've got it?
Yeah, it's, you know, I love it. It's in the perfect place for me. It's, you know, the hard part is it probably took about 2 or 3 years after it was finished to sort of get it up to the standards of what you would think, you know, a brand spanking new house should be like. So it's a lot of repairs. And, you know, actually, if I were to do it over again, I think I would look around for a house that was already built that somebody else had been dumb enough to already fix so that it's up to normal standards.
One thing people don't always think about is landscaping. I mean, that's a whole different kettle of fish, but it's also part of building a house too. People may not think of it. What was that like? You got a lot of growing things here in Panama.
Yeah, it's I mean, it's another one of those things that you just, I think, have to be prepared that Panama has its own way of doing things. It's, you know, the grass was basically planting runners. You know, where maybe in the States you'd get a crew to come in and just lay pallets of sod, whereas up there it's more of you pick, you know, they've got runners of grass and put them in, and it's just expected to grow and fill itself in.
Does it?
Yeah, it actually does. It's another one of those things you find yourself pretty skeptical about going into, but there's also different qualities of grass, different classes. So, you know, you have a choice, but it's a good thing to know what you want, to take a look around, and it's been one of the tougher things for me is I live in an area that's somewhat unique. It's at 1,000 meters, and there weren't any other houses around me to look and compare and get ideas from. The other houses that are in the Altos del Maria complex are at a lower altitude, so even the houses that were built weren't much use to me. And you know, the rest of the landscaping, the flowers, the trees, anything else you want to add, everything's got its name in Spanish. So knowing you want an azalea doesn't do you much good until you can figure out what it's called here.
They have decent nurseries where you can go pick this stuff up?
Yeah, there's just nurseries everywhere. It's one of the really nice things is just how affordable everything is. I mean, I just did a garden in the front of my house, and you know, I'm sure it would have been multitudes of what I paid if I were back in the U.S. The other thing where I'm at is it's really hard to anticipate just how quickly everything does grow. You know, and you think you filled the space and everything's perfect, and you know, a month or two later, it's just wildly out of control, and you know, then you try to figure out what to do with it.
You have a gardener that comes up once in a while?
Yeah, I do. He mostly focuses just on getting the grass cut, and you know, we're working on the weeding and the other aspects of it.
How much does he cost?
He comes 3 times a month. Costs me $80.
And does he live nearby?
Yeah.
Okay, so you don't have to worry about transporting him or anything like that.
No, that's one of the reasons he's my gardener.
Yes, I can imagine it is. Well, good. Furnishing a house. You had a good-sized house, a lot of furnishings going in there. How challenging was that? How many different places you have to go to? Do you have to get everything out of the city and so forth?
Yeah, I did. Again, that's given the fact that the city seems to be expanding out towards us now. Before you go up the mountain, it's, I guess, about 100 kilometers from the city. So now, at this point, there's a lot more coming out, and I think makes things a lot easier.
Jim's talking about the Coronado region here, which is one I know many of you have heard about. He is above that, in the mountains above that Coronado area.
At the time, I think most of the furniture came from 3 or 4 different stores. The one thing you have to be prepared for, if you do build outside the city, is all the delivery costs. That's that's always tacked on top of whatever you pay.
Well, looking back on it, if you were sitting across, if I, for instance, was just arrived and I was interested in building a house, what would you say to me as somebody who's seriously interested in building a house here in Panama? What would you tell them to do? Where would they begin?
Well, it's funny. I mean, the first piece of advice I would give you is look around, talk to people about who they'd recommend as a builder. The caveat to this approach, of course, is what I've seen happen is every time word gets out that there's a reliable builder, he ends up getting so much work that his quality goes down and he goes back onto the pile of guys that you should never ever use. So it's kind of a mixed bag. I don't really know how you do it, but I would say talk to as many people as you can. And if you're coming from the U.S., you're coming from Canada, Europe, I'd say try to find a circle of people that could actually share your reference point and, go from there. Once I did find a builder, an architect that I was happy with. The one thing I would do differently is hire an inspector of my own, somebody outside of the builder to manage the process, somebody that could be on site every day or every couple days, because you let things go for a couple days and they can just go wildly wrong. I didn't have these problems, but I've heard just tons of horror stories of, things like a builder forgetting to run the gas lines until, the end of the project, and compensating by just sticking an outlet for a gas line into a wall that's not connected to anything in a wall. Somebody not paying attention to their workers and having them wash leftover concrete down a drain, and finding out once you're in the house that you've got a drain that's full of hardened concrete, and that's the reason everything's backing up. There's just story after story. So, the added expense, if you don't know building, you can't be on a job site, I'd definitely go with the added expense of having somebody up there that could be.
Well, when I hear you talking, I'm thinking about people who come down and try to buy a house and sign a contract and everything without talking to a lawyer, and having the lawyer take a look at the documents, do the due diligence and everything else. And it's sort of the same idea. If you don't have the expertise in the background, find an independent party who does, and so it costs you an extra few $100s or whatever, $1,000 or $2,000. If you're building a home, it's going to set you back a considerable amount of money. It's a very small price to pay to have somebody up there keeping a good eye on what's going on.
Yeah, and it's Actually, even if you've got a building background, people tell you what to expect, and I think even myself, I was somewhat arrogant about it, thinking, I've built my share houses. It's different for me. It's not. There's definitely a different style of building here, the way they go about it, and it's really easy to get lost in it. And the other thing is you write things into the contract that you think means something at the time. You've got dates, you've got draw dates or benchmarks for draws. You build things into the contract like the completion date and then penalties for each day after it's not done. And they all just end up meaning nothing. I mean, your house is overdue, your builders run out of money, you're pretty much faced with, do I ever want to get in this house again? Or, am I going to stop everything because I'm going to get $75 a day because he's late? And, no matter how clever you think you are, it ain't going to happen. And I think the way you avoid that is by having someone on site monitoring the process, overseeing the quality, and also managing the benchmarks and the financial side of things. And there are things in the contract too, like change orders, and there's always or should always be a process in a contract. But once things get moving, it's easy to start overlooking that. Just change that. We'll deal with it later. And then all of a sudden, you find yourself getting hit with a bill with all these changes, and you're saying, I don't remember that. But so it's definitely requires some vigilance.
I should say so, but I think particularly when you're building a home, some people say that you should come and rent or live here for a year or two before you think of doing that. I think there's some value to that, but nothing beats getting the right professionals together to do it. Because I don't care if you've lived here 10 years, if you don't have it set up properly, it's not going to get built. But I mean, I guess maybe being here for a while, at least you might choose a better site. I don't know. How do you feel about that? Do you think there's any real value to it, or is it really?
Yeah, I'm a huge advocate of renting first. Not only does it give you a chance to make sure you're building or you're going to be settling in the right place for you, just because you'll have an opportunity to get around a little more, see what's available, see different parts of the country, and I think people come out here sometimes, buy a piece of land and say this is it, and then there might be a little buyer's remorse later when they start becoming more familiar with exactly what's available. And if you're here renting, I think it also, at the same time, you're building a network, and it gives you that many more resources to draw from when the time comes.
It's interesting because I've talked to a number of people who have built their own homes, and so far, I'd say in almost all the cases, they've had all sorts of problems and difficulties as you've outlined. It's taken longer, and there's always been all sorts of little problems, what have you. But when it all is said and done, it works out somehow. And I'm not sure exactly why that is. It seems to happen more frequently here than my experience back in the U.S. But it's a long road. But when you get to the end of it, it's maybe worth it. Is that how you put it, or is it?
Or is it a question of perhaps your standards have just been lowered and expectations are smaller?
There you go. That might be value in that too.
It's I think part of it is it is an exhausting process. And by the time you get done with it, you've got so much invested that, you know, one way or another, I'm going to be happy.
Yeah, right. I think it's a good point you make about it being exhausting, because people moving down for the first time, it's exhausting enough. I mean, you're going to have to find a place to live. You're going to have to get familiar with the language, with the culture, with what's available, with the way things are done, and try to build a house in the process. That's asking a hell of a lot. I could never have even thought about doing that. I don't have the background. Even with an architect helping me, I would have been swamped trying to do all that at the same time. So I think the idea of renting for a while here and just relaxing and getting into the local area first is a big plus before building anything.
Yeah, and if, you know, if you're building, the flip side of that is if you are still relatively new and you're building and trying to monitor that whole process, you know, you're also not getting as familiar as you could be with the country. I mean, you learn a lot about the culture by getting a house built, but still, it's you know, it's just not a picnic building.
There are better parts of the culture sometimes.
Yeah, it's. I mean, somebody told me once that if you have no patience and you come here, you'll learn it. If you are a patient person, it will definitely be tested. And I have to say, I haven't heard anything truer.
Good. Well, that's the story of building a house in Panama. Thank you very much for stopping by. Is there anything further you wanted to add, or does that sum it up pretty well?
I'd say we pretty much hit the big points.
Okay. Well, thanks again. Appreciate having you here, and thank you for watching.